Hey, everybody. This is Jeff Martin with Magic City Books. We're so thrilled to have you with us. We're looking at you live on Facebook Live and on Zoom, and really thrilled to have you with us for our ongoing virtual author event series, which we have been doing for many, many months, and have had so many different wonderful people speaking with us about a zillion different topics. We've had wonderful novelists, journalists, talked about, from mystery novels to cookbooks and everything in between. And it's been a really great way to stay connected with all of you. So thank you for joining us. I hope you've been with us a few times over the past year. And we're going to keep doing these virtuals for a little bit longer. I would encourage you to go to our website, magiccitybooks.com, and you can see the full schedule. One of note that I will mention is July 7th, we're going to be hosting Adam Serwer and Ta-Nehisi Coates for a conversation on Adam's new book, The Cruelty is the Point, which is a wonderful new collection of essays, really looking at where we are politically, how we got here, and what we're going to do moving forward. That's going to be on July 7th, so you can see more about that on our website. Really excited for tonight's event. We were really lucky and thrilled pre-pandemic to do an event with Lawrence Wright for his wonderful book on Texas. And we talked about all kinds of different things to a full house of people, which I hope you guys remember what that was like. It was a time when humans actually gathered together in a room, and we laughed, and we cried together, and we shared the same air. And we're looking forward to getting back to doing that actually this summer, and late July, we're going to be doing some in-person events. And actually July 13th, kind of our first real back to in-person thing, will be with the U.S. Poet Laureate Joy Harjo at All Souls Unitarian Church. So that's going to be coming up. But getting back to the normal pace of things will be good. But I would imagine we'll be doing kind of a hybrid with these virtuals and in-person as we move forward. And there will be opportunities too where we probably will keep doing these. I think embracing the technology and kind of keeping this as an option will be something we'll do moving forward. But when we had Mr. Wright with us for his book on Texas, we had a great time. And who knew at that moment what the world was going to be doing just a few, gosh, it could have been months later. I can't remember exactly when we did that event, but it seemed pretty quick that everything went upside down. And so if you had a chance to read The Plague Year, which was this long form piece in the New Yorker, I think you got a sense that hopefully, I think anytime I read a book or an article by Lawrence Wright in the New Yorker, I'm thinking, I wonder where this is going. Is this going to be kind of the next nugget of a book so we can go a little bit deeper? So when I heard that The Plague Year was coming out in book form and he was going to expand on that, I was really thrilled and hoping that we could have a conversation. There's certainly a moment here in the book that really pertains directly to us and our city as well. So looking forward to talking about the book. If you don't have this book, and you should, we're going to make it really easy for you. You can click on the chat right here, buy a copy from us directly. You're supporting the nonprofit work that we do at Magic City Books, and also this wonderful author. And if you have questions during our conversation, which I'm sure you will, put them into the Q&A and we'll pull some of those while we go along. But let's get to the task at hand. Lawrence Wright, thank you for joining us virtually back in Tulsa. We're thrilled to see you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be back virtually in Tulsa. I used to live down the road in Ponca City.
Yeah, and we, we talked a little bit about that last time you were here, but obviously you're down in Austin. You've been, you are a Texan for a long, long time now. And the last book we talked about was your book on Texas, and I think at the end of that conversation, I remember asking you the question everybody asks every author that comes, which is, what's next? And of course, neither one of us knew that this would be coming down the pike. But I'm curious to know let's talk about the article first. So you published the article in the New Yorker. This is a long form piece. How long was the piece?
It was 31,000 words.
Yeah. So tell us, kind of compare that to your average articles, because that is, when I read it, it was, New Yorker is known for long form pieces, and I loved kind of a deep dive, but that was beyond the norm even right now.
Well, yeah, I mean, people remember Hiroshima by John Hersey, which was the same length, occupying essentially the entire well of the magazine.
Yeah.
Most articles, 5,000 to 8,000 words, in the New Yorker, and those are reasonable sized articles. But occasionally, we don't do, sometimes in the past, we used to do multiple issue articles. And I wondered if they were going to break
Like a
form.
serialized, like almost like a
Yeah,
serial.
yeah. I haven't. It's been years since I had one that was in two parts, but it's something that I don't know, in the magazine trade. I think they feel like readers don't have the patience for it.
Yeah. So I think next year will mark your 30th year at the New Yorker or somewhere around
Right.
there.
Yeah.
And, you know, you've written about all kinds of different topics. Many of them, of course, have gone on to be books. I'm thinking about the piece you did with the director Paul Haggis, which eventually became Going Clear, and all of that. When did you kind of think that this would be something outside the magazine? Was that always something that you had in mind?
Well, it was in June of 2019 that David Remnick, the editor of the New Yorker, and my editor, Daniel Zaleski, called me and asked for Remnick calls it a big dumb story. You know, the the idea was that New Yorker had done some wonderful journalism around the pandemic, but they hadn't done a
You're
kind
talking
of
about June of 2020, not 2019.
2020, yeah,
Yeah.
2020. And so they'd done a lot of fine work, but they hadn't done a kind of panoramic look at that. And I was very touched that they turned to me with so many wonderful writers in their fold, but also I had a lot of ambivalence about it. You know, I'd written a novel about a pandemic, a hypothetical pandemic that came out in the teeth of it in April of 2020, and and I felt that I had done pretty much what I wanted to say about pandemics. And also, at the time, I really didn't want to write about the Trump administration. Just there was so many reporters on top of that story that, and I never liked getting into a press mob. But I started to think about how this pandemic has touched everything in our lives. You know, politics, the economy, race, science, you know, our social and lives, the culture, you know, Broadway, everything, you know, from stem to stern, our culture has been, is continuing to be reshaped by this pandemic. And then I thought, how do you pull all these shards together? And my strategy was to look for representative institutions, Congress, the White House, Wall Street, Broadway, you know, just frontline hospitals, just and see if they could, and then within those institutions find representative figures who could tell the story. And in that I was just unbelievably lucky. I mean, there was an element of serendipity to this that has never happened in my career, you know, and I had to do it all on the phone and by Zoom. So that was another obstacle that I felt, you know, I had to overcome. But, you know, once I accepted the challenge, I was so grateful for it.
Yeah. So when you were here last, you know, the novel was coming, and you knew the novel was coming after the Texas book, and the book is the end of October, and of course, you mentioned it deals with some of these issues, and I wonder, obviously, you know, timing being what it is, you know, do you think the book was recognized? We'll talk about, I don't want to get off on that book too much, but I think, you know, do you think the book was recognized more because of the timing it was released and what was happening there? Did it benefit from this kind of, you know, strange alignment?
I don't know, Jeff. I was on a British late night talk show when I was promoting that book, and the presenter said, "Well, I don't suppose anyone would pay any attention to this book if it weren't for the pandemic," as if it was some kind of sinister publishing plot to, you know, to bring out a book when the bookstores are all closed and the airports are shut down. You know, it's not the greatest time to publish, but it did get a lot of attention, and, you know, a lot of you know, words like prescient and prophecy being tossed around, which were inappropriate, because with that book, I just did what I would do with any nonfiction or book or a New Yorker story. I just went out and researched it and talked to experts and asked them what would happen if something like 1918 flu came back now. Would we be any better prepared than our ancestors? And the answer essentially was no, not for a novel virus that we have no treatment for and no vaccines. We'd actually be in a worse spot in some ways because of the speed of modern transportation. It would spread a pandemic all over the globe almost overnight. So that sobered me up. And the novel became a kind of what I thought was going to be a cautionary tale, but by the time it came out, the tale had already been told.
It's not unlike that. I remember in the early months of the pandemic, the number one movie on iTunes was Contagion, the Steven Soderbergh film, and people were kind of, in a strange way, kind of leaning into the materials about the pandemic as opposed to
Yeah.
avoiding it. And I guess that's because people are trying to understand and cope. I'm not sure what the psychological reason would be to want to immerse yourself more into that, but there is something there I can't quite understand.
I had a similar experience when I co-wrote a movie called The Siege with Denzel Washington and
Edward
uh,
Zwick, yeah.
yeah, Ed Zwick was the director, and it, uh, it the concept was it came out in 1998, and the concept was what would happen if terrorism came to America? What if it happened in New York? Would we be ready? It was already in London and Paris and Tel Aviv and places. Acts of terrorism. The U.S. had been essentially untouched, and so what would it be like? And it was a box office bomb. But then after 9/11, it was the most rented movie in America. And once again, there was all this, this is prophecy. What I had done was simply ask the question, what would we be like? How would we behave? And I asked, counter-terrorists and people in the Bureau, FBI and in State Department. And I looked at history about how other countries handled it. And so I wrote a movie in which we see New York being under attack by Islamic terrorists, and it leads to torture and all these things about our country that I hated to see come true, but were predictable.
Yeah, great movie. I would encourage people to watch it. It's one of the best, I think, underrated Bruce Willis performances. So I'm curious. You mentioned Remnick comes to you with this idea of this big dumb story, this panoramic idea, trying to capture a huge amount of information. And no matter how much you have in a magazine to share that story, it's still a lot to pack in there. What's the entry point? You mentioned finding people, but where's the moment where you go, okay, this is still all happening? Well, you're writing it as it's happening, which you don't have the luxury of distance to kind of see what was happening. How do you start that process?
Well, as I said, I had an awful lot of luck on my side. And of course, Branch Rickey, the great baseball manager, used to say that luck is the residue of effort. And so you're not going to get lucky if you don't go out and look for, what you need. But to start with, going back to the novel, when I was researching it, I had to create a virus that would pass muster with sciences, And I found this guy at the National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases named Barney Graham. And I had no idea of his standing in that community of immunologists. But he helped me make up this imaginary virus. And then he helped me cure it because I had no idea. I had written myself into a corner. And I got Barney to help me figure out a way for my hero to cure it. It turns out that Barney Graham is the architect of the vaccine that is in both Pfizer and Moderna. He's probably one of the greatest immunologists in history. And so I already had a relationship with Barney. And that was, first stroke of luck. Then I needed somebody in the White House, and I didn't have any contacts. And moreover, I couldn't go to the White House. And so I was stranded, and, I was looking for possible candidates to talk to. And the name Matthew Pottinger came up. He was a deputy national security advisor. And I realized that I had met his father, Stan, who had been in the Nixon administration. And that was it. But I also knew that Stan Pottinger was a good friend of a friend of mine. So I talked to my mutual friend, and he turned out that he had known Matt since he was a little boy. And so would Matt talk to me, and it turned out Matt had come to one of my one-man shows years before, and we'd actually had dinner, and I'd totally forgotten about it. So there's another piece of weird luck.
Yeah.
And the other thing about Matt Pottinger, aside from his own placement in the White House, his wife had been an epidemiologist and virologist at the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta. And his brother was an epidemiologist at the University of Washington, where the first case of COVID came when it hit the United States in January of 2020. And Matt Pottinger turns out to be the guy who advocated for closing off the flights from China and then later from Europe, and the use of masks. He started the COVID virus task force. Plus, he's a former reporter. He had been in China working for the Wall Street Journal when the SARS epidemic broke out in 2002 and 3. Jeff, you couldn't invent a character, more useful to me, and so he was. There are a lot of other examples I could give you, but the whole trail of writing this book is, almost a magic path of fascinating personalities, deeply engaged, and so many heroic people whose efforts have been, I think, pretty much overlooked. And I was just really fortunate to find them and have the opportunity to talk to them.
So, you're obviously very well known and associated with 9/11 because of your book, The Looming Tower, which won the Pulitzer Prize, rightly so, and it, has I think become kind of one of the books on that topic, if not the book on that topic. And I'm curious, at the height of the pandemic, where we were losing, it was often said, a 9/11 a day, we were losing that in terms of the amount of people we were losing to COVID. It hasn't still felt like people, if you had to rank it, I would imagine people would still say 9/11 was worse than this, because it has in some ways felt like an easier thing, even though, as you chronicle in the book, it's affected every area of our life. I'm curious if you agree with that, or if you feel that too, that people don't kind of understand the scope of this. And when we think about something like a 9/11, or even something like a World War II, in terms of deaths and things like that, this has far surpassed that. Why do we see these things differently? Is it about the way it's presented to us? Is it about just the violence on television? We're not seeing the deaths. Why do you think we think of this that way?
I've thought a lot about this question, Jeff, and it's not just this pandemic. It's characteristic of pandemics in the past. 1918 flu, it killed between 50 and 100 million people. It was simultaneous with World War One. Yeah. And it actually killed more soldiers in World War One than the war did. But what's remembered from that period of time? The 1918 pandemic was essentially buried in human consciousness. And it wasn't until more recent times that people began to write history books about it. But essentially, it was also kind of true of the plague. There were some novels and histories written about it, like the Boccaccio's Decameron and stuff like that. But this is a disease that killed a third of Europe, and yet what you can read about in that era, Holy Roman Empire and stuff like that, is people don't like to give agency to nature. This is the way that I've kind of come to understand this. And you can understand it better in 1918, when death by disease was far more common. And although, there's a spike in mortality in 1918, mortality rates are still very high. And, the 1918 pandemic lowered the average age of Americans by 7 years. Just it's hard to believe, but right after that, the Roaring 20s, and it's all in the past. And, this pandemic is historic in terms of its scale. We're approaching, we're over 600,000 deaths in the United States, and the Spanish flu, 1918 flu, killed 675,000 Americans officially. It was a much smaller country, and that would have been felt more differently. But that's more than all the wars that we've been engaged in. It's actually more than died in the Civil War, which was the bloodiest contest in American history. So, one of the things that I found in researching this is how much unresolved grief there is in the country. It's not just in families that have lost people, but the strain on frontline workers was, but I think also part of the grief is people feeling the loss of the country they thought that they lived in, a sense that, we were defeated by this. And we were, the government failed so miserably in its response. And I think it has caused a lot of introspection about who we are and where do we go from here.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the idea that death and murder are both death. It's like we see, I was thinking about that even just yesterday with this horrible building collapse in Florida. You look at it, it's impossible not to think of the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, right? And I
Right.
think the actual death toll will be almost the same when if everyone who's missing ends up
Right.
unfortunately passed away. But we don't think of those the same way. Of course, one was intentional, but the other one wasn't. But that the idea of agency in nature is something that's a great way to put it. So I'm curious, what do you think? The thing that's bugged me the most about this whole situation, especially, and I want to get into some of the political side of it, talking about the Trump administration and some of the mistakes that were made, especially early on, which is, why do you think, I always wonder if Trump had been smart about it and kind of owned it a little bit more, it would have been in some ways the easiest pathway to re-election in history if he had just kind of done it in a smart way. Now, I don't know where ego steps in there, but for someone who you hear about being a historically hypochondriacal person, and
Right.
he was, you would think that like this would be in the wheelhouse of something that he would want to get right and be scared of. It just seems like, why didn't it go that way?
Well, it's a really interesting question, because there was a moment when it seemed like he was seizing the reins, and he offered compassion for states, even democratic states that were struggling, and assurance that we're going to get through this. And this was in early March of 2020, and that was a high point for his administration in terms of addressing the pandemic. Right after that, it's very puzzling. I mean, he seemed to rebel against taking control, and I think you're right. Had he taken control, he would still be president.
Yeah.
There was in March that same month, almost the day after or something like that, of his speech where he was so assuring to Americans. He had a call with the 50 governors and also tribal chieftains and territorial leaders. Weekly call, and he says to the governors, "We're behind you. We support you." But when he explained what he meant was, as for PPE, personal protective equipment, masks, syringes, gowns, ventilators, get it yourselves. We're behind you, but get it yourselves. And the governors were expecting a federal plan. They were counting on it. Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, told me that she realized during that call that Michigan was out. They were out of PPE. They didn't have enough for the next shift. And, suddenly they have to scramble around and figure out a way to get all the equipment that they need to protect their frontline workers. Um, so they start calling China, and all of them do, and they're all calling the same places. And so, Andrew Cuomo said it was like being on eBay, because, he'd be bidding for something for New York, and then he was told California just raised it. And so all 50 states competing. And then sometimes when the shipments would come in, like Charlie Baker, the governor of Massachusetts, got all these, millions of masks from China. And when it arrived at the Port Authority in New York, the Fed seized it. They stole it. And next time he got the owner of the New England Patriots to fly his team plane to China. And when it came back to Boston, the state patrol hid it from the feds. And it's not just Massachusetts. This was happening in states all over the country. And Gina Raimondo, who was the governor of Rhode Island, which not a very influential state, she was begging for something from the National Storehouse, which was severely depleted, as it turns out. They were very low on all those all that vital equipment. But she was assured they're going to send her something, and the truck was coming. And when's the truck coming? It's coming Thursday. Finally, no, it's coming Friday. Finally, the truck comes. It's empty. They sent her an empty truck, and in my mind, that characterizes the federal response to this pandemic. It could have been so different. And had it been, I think Trump would be in an entirely different place.
Yeah. There is a chapter in the book called Tulsa, which is about the speech that Donald Trump gave on the weekend of Juneteenth last year, which, we just had that 1-year anniversary. I remember, being here. It was a hugely fraught moment because we were in the middle of the Black Lives Matter movement. We're just a month, basically, when they announced his speech here, it was just literally like a month after George Floyd had been murdered.
Right.
It was also coming up on Tulsa's Juneteenth celebration. Of course, Tulsa has this history, which you write about in the book, about the race massacre. It was 99 years at that point, and we just had the centennial here. They were originally planning to do the talk on Juneteenth, which was, I can tell you from being in the city here, it was not well received with our communities of color, and certainly caused a lot of consternation. And of course, he changed that, or they changed that, and then took credit for basically, I think he said something along the lines of like, no one knew about Juneteenth
Right.
until
Yeah. It was a holiday in 47 states, but he hadn't heard of it.
So that happened. And then I think, of course, now living here, I think we see things differently. But the fact that you wrote about it and kind of pointed it out, I think it was a pivotal moment in the pandemic. What drew your attention to that speech beyond just, I think, the embarrassment of only 6,000 people showing up when they said 1 million tickets had been sold and all this stuff?
Well, it was a huge stumble for the Trump administration. They thought they had sold 1 million tickets, and a bunch of TikTokers and K-pop fans had, tripped up the administration. He said some things during that speech. First, he said he had told his advisors to stop the testing, slow the testing down. We're finding too many cases. Yeah. And so I started looking at that speech. And also it was a speech where Herman Cain got infected and died 6 weeks later.
And tons of Secret Service agents. Yeah.
It was all beginning to crash down. And the Secret Service was terribly affected. And so I decided I'd take a look at Tulsa. And then Tulsa began to creep into this narrative in ways that I was totally surprised about. One was there was a Lisa Cook, who's an economist at the University of Michigan, had done a study about Black patents. It was a way of measuring sort of cultural effectiveness. And from 1870 to 1940, I think it was the span of time. And so, Black patents were much lower per capita than whites, but they ran along in a kind of parallel course. And then things began to change. And so she correlated it with lynching. The white patents were unmoved by that, but Black patents would have a sudden drop and then regain, and then another lynching and then regain. And then around 1890, lynchings began to dwindle. And so then suddenly in 1921, the rate of Black patents dropped precipitously. And she correlates it with the Tulsa massacre and the loss in confidence among Black Americans that they would be protected by the government. And, it's still true, according to Lisa Cook, that the rate of patents per capita in the Black community reached its zenith in 1899. So in some ways, that community's never really recovered, if you use that as a metric. And then the other weird thing, when I was writing about Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, and this plot to kidnap her, which was a little tangential to my effort, but I was intrigued because these militia people in Michigan were angry at the lockdown. And so it was a feature of the pandemic. And then part of the group is the Wolverine Watchman. And so in Michigan, they use the word Wolverine as an emblem of the state, but the Watchman, they took that from the HBO series, which was based on the Tulsa massacre, and the plan, and the bad guys in the series had a plan to kill all the police and take over the government. And that was the plan of the Wolverine Watchman. And later, that group, what they did in Michigan was besiege the Capitol, attempt to kidnap or kill the governor. And then, you had militia members then going to the January 6th insurrection. So all of these threads went back to Tulsa. And it never occurred to me that an event like that, so buried in our consciousness, could have these ramifications a century later.
Yeah, I was mentioning to you, before we jumped on here, we did an event not too long ago with the creator of Watchmen, and he is someone who just is kind of completely baffled at kind of the parallels that have been born, since that show politically, and all those different things. I'm curious, you mentioned, I love what you said earlier about this big dumb story. I keep going back to that for the New Yorker, but speaking of big dumb moves, if we did like a David Letterman style top 10 list, what do you think were kind of the fatal flaws of that year? The government response, or whether it was Trump personally or the government or the CDC, what were a few of the things do you think that really tipped the direction and the balance of how successful or unsuccessful our response would be? Where were those moments?
Well, I think you have to go back with the Trump administration. When they first came into office, they had the Obama administration had handed off a playbook for pandemic preparedness. What do you do when everything goes haywire? And I've read it. It's really interesting because you get the sense of the scope of the government. If you have a mass death scene, you can call in a bunch of retired dental assistants and FBI agents and something. They call it something. The acronym is DMORT, Department of Mortuary Specialists or something. And there's a secret air wing that you can bring in. It's very intriguing, but the Trump administration threw it out. So they started their own tabletop exercise with a scenario to plan for future events. And the scenario, which is bizarre in terms of its prescience, a traveler returns to Chicago from China. He's got a dry cough. The next day, his son goes to a rock concert. 6 months later, 576,000 Americans are dead, very close to the actual number that, so what did they learn in the tabletop exercise? Well, it showed that the states were going to be relying on the federal government, and they're going to be crosswise. The agencies within the federal government would be at war with each other because of who's got the authority to do one thing or another. Nobody knows what their responsibility is. Businesses are suffering because they don't know how to deal with having their employees stay at home. The supply chain gets bollocks with China, and as critical supplies in the national storehouse are so depleted, there's no way to bridge it. And one thing after another happened exactly as the Trump administration predicted it would. And Robert Kadlec, who had administered the test, he was the Deputy Health and Human Services Secretary. He said, well, we've seen this movie and we knew it was going to turn out bad, but they didn't do anything about it. They didn't do anything about it. They did everything wrong that their own scenario had predicted. And I don't know, it makes me angry to think that, they had studied the problem and then disregarded the lessons that they themselves had surfaced. And, everything followed from that. They knew better, but they didn't do better.
No. Do you think that there was any way, given the leadership that was in place, that things like mask wearing and things could have not been politicized? To me, I just kind of felt like it was going to go that way from the get-go because of how we are. But I wonder, like some of the early decisions where people were kind of going back and forth on it, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. Some things kind of looked a little bit, flip-floppy in those early months. And I think people were saying, well, hey, they said you shouldn't then, and now they say you should. Did that plant the seeds for kind of giving people the kind of argument to say, hey, they don't really know because they said it was this way, one way, or what politicized that?
Well, of course, the missteps and in the early stages, often by public health officials who really didn't know what they were dealing with. They thought it was going to be like the flu, and it's not. They thought it would be like SARS-1, and it's not. I mean, what they didn't know at the beginning, for instance, was that it spreads through asymptomatic infection. That is entirely different from SARS or the flu, and we didn't know that, and really until April. The mask wearing, it could have been different. I accept your point, that we're an unruly people and there was going to be an element of resistance, and Americans weren't used to it. But I think it all goes down to leadership. And I don't think it's a Republican Democrat thing. You can you can divide the country into different states and how they did, how they fared. And it's true, there's a lot more resistance to vaccination and mask wearing in deep red states, but it's not entirely true. And one of the people I found most interesting, and I wrote a little bit about, I wish I'd had more time to spend on him, Jim Justice, the governor of West Virginia. And not only a Republican, he's a billionaire coal baron. He's not the kind of person that you automatically think is, going to be this compassionate center of response. But when COVID virus made its appearance, he did daily briefings, and he began by saying, West Virginia is the oldest state demographically. It is the sickest state. This is going to hurt us, and we have to be together as one people. He was one of the first to get all of the people in the nursing home tested. And he's, every night he would read out the names of the dead and, say a little bit about them. He said, West Virginia is a love thy neighbor state. He knew how to talk to his people. And even now, it's kind of amusing, but, states some of them are trying to boost the vaccinations through lotteries, and you can win money or scholarship or beer.
$1 million in Ohio. Yeah.
Well, you can get marijuana in Washington State, and but in West Virginia, they're offering guns and pickup trucks. And I think, well, he knows his people, but he's still trying to, save. He's doing, I think, a responsible job. West Virginia hasn't topped out as one of the best states, but it was supposed to be the worst. And it's about where Texas is right now in terms of the mortality and so on. And I just think that a lot of credit goes to that kind of leadership who was totally absent at the federal level.
Yeah, and I think the governor of Arkansas has kind of been ahead of some of that too, which has kind of been surprising. Yeah, it's been interesting to see who's kind of had some of the profiles and courage in this. For everybody who's watching, just one more reminder, the book is The Plague Year by Lawrence Wright. If you don't have it, you should get it. We're just kind of barely scratching the surface and all the reporting that Lawrence does in this book and all the information that kind of, I think we've been inundated, but I think there's a big difference between having information and being informed. And you're going to read this book and be informed in a way that you weren't before about what's happened to us this last year. And when I say us, I think that's one of the important things that you really tackle here, which is the kind of collective trauma here that we've felt. And we talked about this earlier, where we talked about death, specifically about this kind of unchecked amount of grief that we're dealing with. Do you think that kind of PTSD, because I can't quite feel it in a way, you and I live in, you live in Texas, I'm in Oklahoma. So we have, I think, some, a lot of people in our states that are kind of a little bit resistant to the whole thing from the get-go. So we may not be feeling it the way maybe California or even New York at its height, like back in the spring of last year, was feeling it. But, is there a reckoning coming? Is there a psychological reckoning coming? What's the end result of this trauma?
Well, I think we can look at the COVID-19 experience through different lenses. I think when we're, a little past it, we'll look back and we'll think, well, for one thing, one lens you can look at it is as an X-ray. There was a study done by Johns Hopkins and several other entities that came out in October of 2019, just a month before the disease appeared in Wuhan. And it ranked the nations of the world according to their ability to handle a pandemic. And the United States was number one, and the United Kingdom was number two. And if you had turned those rankings upside down, it might have been a better representation of what actually happened, because countries like Rwanda and Latvia did very well, whereas we were really close to the bottom in terms of our mortality per capita and the number of cases we had. So that's one lens. I think we can see that it was an X-ray into our society, and we can see all the broken places, and that we were not the country we thought we were, or the rest of the world thought we were. We're something else, and now we've been educated. This disease helped us understand who we are and what our failings are. So we have the opportunity to mend those failings. And I think that we could also look at it as a kind of gift, because this is not the last pandemic we're going to face. Just think about, since the turn of the century, we've had Ebola and SARS and West Nile and Zika and Nipah and bird flu. And I haven't even run down all these brand new viruses. And many of them far more dangerous than COVID-19. They might not have been as contagious, but one day we'll see a virus that is deadlier and more contagious than COVID-19. Yeah. And if that had happened, suppose SARS-1 had been as contagious, it killed 10% of the people it infected, and COVID-19 kills only 2%. suppose it had been MERS, another coronavirus, killed 35% of the people that it infected. Uh, you know, we would have been it's hard to even imagine the catastrophe that we would have been facing, but other diseases are on the precipice. And so we should look at this as a harbinger. This is not the last pandemic we will face. And I hope that we will have learned something about the uses of government, the trust in science, that we failed to take into account in this particular experience.
So there's a question that I've heard asked to journalists sometimes. It's kind of a dark question, but it's interesting, and I'm wondering how you'll respond in relation to this project, which is, if the world was going to end and you could either die 2 years before it happened, or be there when you were old to see it happen and kind of understand it, see what it looked like, witness it, observe it, kind of be part of it. What's your kind of gut instinct like? And I guess I say that to say, having the tool set that you have and covering the things you do, you were kind of the right person, I think, to kind of write about this, given all the projects you've done in the past, and you had something to put your talent and skill into. And it was probably great for you personally to have something to focus on in this last year in a way, and kind of put your effort into. Is it invigorating? I don't want to say that like it's a good thing, but is it invigorating being a journalist and being a writer, living in a moment like this with all this stuff going on?
Well, yeah, I mean, I feel years ago, I made a resolution that I would only do things that were important or fun. And, I wanted to have a consequential career, but, also want to have fun. So, but, what when you were winding up that question, whether I want to live through it, yes, I want to be on the front lines trying to understand what's happening. What it made me think of is that my dad died in the spring of 2001, before 9/11, and he had been, from the Dust Bowl in Kansas, and had been in war 7 years in World War II in Korea, and he was part of the greatest generation that had taken America and made it the most powerful economy in the history of the world. And I was in some ways glad he didn't see that, but I wouldn't want to be the one to miss it myself. I feel like whatever skills I've been given, that I have the opportunity and maybe the ability to get into things and try to sort them out. And I just feel also really grateful that I have the opportunity to go tell people stories. What are we but our stories in some ways? And yet they're so perishable. Memories fade, people die. And, but before that happens, I try to be out on the ground collecting these stories and stringing them together in some kind of coherent narrative. And in that way, it awards a kind of immortality to certain people in certain moments in time. And I just see that as my job.
Yeah, I was so glad that you mentioned John Hersey and Hiroshima earlier, because that's exactly a perfect example of that book. I actually did a conversation about that book just a few months ago for a new biography of Hersey that came out, and that book, I reread it around that time, and it still resonates, and it feels like it's alive, and it feels like it's the closest thing to kind of helping you understand what that is. And of course, hopefully, years from now, people will be able to use books like yours to kind of understand this moment. But I always, the thing I've kind of been thinking about is, I'm 40 years old. This happened, the year I turned 40. And I was thinking, is this going to be kind of the most consequential thing? We always think about that. The way my grandparents had World War II, right? We were talking about this at the beginning of our talk. The way we think of this in the history of the world. Is this going to be one of those huge red letter things like a war, like or will we forget about it like we did in 1918? You made that great point as well. Do you think that this will have staying power just because of the media age that we live in, more than, say, the 1918 pandemic?
I don't know. It's far as, change history in your lifetime, Jeff, it's, I'm a lot older than you. I've lived a third of the history of the United States of America, more than it, and I have seen, you know, race relations change. I've seen the election of a black president. I've seen the fall of the Soviet Empire. The end of apartheid. Many wonderful things have happened. And also, I was in Dallas during the Kennedy assassination. So history is always there. You don't escape it. And, I think for all of, the latter half of the 20th century, we thought that we had escaped contagious diseases. And that was an illusion. We thought we had mastered them, with, clever, treatments and vaccines. But nature is always going to be testing us. And, you've got a lot more history ahead of you.
Yeah.
And I hope that that it turns out to be good history, as in the examples that I cited, but there are going to be some landmarks too. And I think the thing is, we have to be as cohesive a society as possible to deal with challenges like that. And I think that one of the things this pandemic has shown us so starkly is how we are not cohesive, and it weakens us, and it leaves us vulnerable to challenges that history is going to pose.
My last question for you is this: where do you think we stand right now? Are we out of the woods with this thing? How are you feeling about the pandemic as of June 28th, 2021? Because of course we're hearing about different variants. We're hearing about a slowdown in people getting vaccinated and the demand for vaccination and different things like that. But, do you feel, because I think I meet people all the time and their sentiments are so wildly different. Some people I think feel like we're out of the woods. Some people feel like, it could come back and, we could kind of be back on lockdown. Where are you on that? And have you talked to some people about it more recently?
I think if you are fully vaccinated, you should enjoy your immunity.
Mm-hmm.
It may not last. So far the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines have been invulnerable to the variants. Although there do seem to be some breakthroughs in Israel that haven't been replicated elsewhere, and I can't account for it. But the only people who are dying now are unvaccinated people, and that should be all you need to say, right, in terms of spurring people on to get vaccinated. But this disease is constantly changing, and it's a mistake to give it a kind of intelligence, but it has one mission, which is to replicate and spread, and it's doing a better job of that. The Delta variant is 60% more contagious than the original virus that came out of Wuhan. And that virus was highly contagious, and the Delta seems to be somewhat deadlier. Another iteration of it could be even deadlier, but it is straining at the leash to try to break through the immunity so it can get into a larger population. The only thing that we have to protect ourselves is vaccination. The more infections that it incurs, the more opportunities for mutation. And the more mutations, the more likely that we'll find a variant of the disease that will break through the immunity that we've been enjoying. So, my message is, if you might be vaccine hesitant for yourself, but you're doing your community a disservice. It's not for you, it's for everybody. And that's a message that I don't think has been communicated as adequately as it should be, is that we need to protect each other. And yes, you may get COVID and it may not even have any symptoms, or you're young and it's not going to bother you. But on the other hand, you'll carry the virus and you'll give it to someone else. That's pretty certain. And so you have to bear the moral responsibility for that.
Yeah. Well, if only we had the same leadership as West Virginia, right? Jim just.
I, he's a fascinating study.
Yeah, yeah. Well, everybody, the book, like I said, is The Plague Year. I hope you guys will take a chance to read it. It's a really fascinating and look at kind of where we are and a look in the mirror for us as a country and the world. And this has been a really great pleasure having a chat with you again. And I hope next time we'll do it in person back for the next one. And stay safe, take care, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Jeff. Look forward to seeing you again.
All right, take care. Stay safe, everybody. Bye-bye.